right? So there I was, minding my own business whilst reviewing quarterly reports. You know, the sort of riveting bedtime reading that keeps CEOs warm at night. When my phone decided to ruin what was already a perfectly mediocre Tuesday. Michael's name flashed up with all the subtlety of a fire alarm. Call me immediately. Emergency regarding Ida. Emergency regarding Ida. My daughter. The apple of my eye. The future of my empire, and apparently, the architect of my professional demise. How delightfully modern of her. 30 years I'd spent building Hansen Tech, from a garage startup to a $250 million enterprise. 30 years of 16-hour days, missed birthdays, and cold dinners that tasted vaguely of regret. All for her, mind you, all for the family. And now, well, now she wanted me declared mentally incompetent. Because nothing says, I love you, Dad, quite like a legal declaration that you've lost your marbles. Wyatt, Michael's voice crackled through the speaker with the warmth of a tax audit. I need to warn you. Ida's filed a lawsuit. Filed a lawsuit. Past tense. Meaning whilst I've been sitting here like some corporate Father Christmas, ho-ho-hoing over profit margins, my own flesh and blood had been busy plotting my professional assassination. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. She wants you declared incompetent to run Hansen Tech, Michael continued, apparently unaware that he was describing what most people would call a typical Tuesday in family business. Incompetent. Me, the man who'd turned 50,000 borrowed pounds into a technology empire while she was still learning to tie her shoelaces. But sure, let's question my competence. Let's not question the competence of the person who thought corporate patricide was a sensible career move. The documentation is extensive, Michael added, which in lawyer speak translates roughly to, she's been planning this longer than most people plan their holidays. Financial records showing erratic decisions. Testimonies about emotional instability. Claims of questionable strategic choices. Apparently, my passionate defense of keeping employees employed and customers satisfied was evidence of cognitive decline. How very 21st century of her. Through my floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's skyline blurred, whether from rain or the sudden realization that I'd raised a corporate Brutus. I couldn't quite tell. The same view I contemplated whilst building this company brick by bloody brick. Deal by exhausting deal. All for her. All for the future I'd so foolishly assumed we'd share. How much time do I have? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be about as comforting as a root canal. Hearing in 1 week. 1 week. 7 days to prepare defense against accusations that I'd lost my edge due to emotional instability following spousal loss. Because apparently, grieving your wife of 35 years is now grounds for corporate incompetence. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. They were using Elena's death against me. My grief as evidence of diminished capacity. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. Like watching someone burn down a cathedral to roast marshmallows. Technically inventive, morally bankrupt. Who else is involved? I asked, though I rather suspected I didn't want to know. James Corbin, Patricia Wheeler, 3 others. She's recruited them with promises of higher dividends under new leadership. Her leadership, because nothing says fiscal responsibility, quite like staging a corporate coup against a person who delivered 30 years of steady growth. But apparently, 12% annual growth and 94% employee retention weren't impressive enough for the modern shareholder. They wanted revolution, not evolution. They wanted disruption, not stability. They wanted to destroy everything Elena and I had built, and they wanted my daughter to be the one holding the matches. After hanging up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my office, surrounded by 30 years of awards, photographs, and the accumulated detritus of what I foolishly believed was success. Elena's photograph watched from my desk, her expression frozen in that knowing smile she'd worn when she tried to warn me about priorities. She thinks you don't love her, Elena had said during her final months, when cancer was stealing her voice but not her wisdom. She thinks you love the company more. But I didn't love the company more. I'd built it for her, for them, for the future I'd imagined we'd all share. Every late night, every missed dinner, every sacrifice had been an investment in their security. I thought I was providing. Apparently, I'd been neglecting. The difference between those two words had just cost me my daughter's loyalty. The drive to Ida's house that evening felt rather like traveling to one's own execution, if executions were catered affairs with proper table settings and polite conversation. I sat in my car outside her Bellevue home for 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to reconcile the woman who'd filed legal papers with the little girl who used to wait by the window for Daddy to come home. The front door opened before I could knock. Ida stood there in her cream jumper, smile perfectly calibrated to the exact wattage of filial affection, the sort of smile politicians practice in mirrors. Dad, right on time. Right on time for what? My own corporate funeral? Her hug felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing it in front of a mirror alongside her courtroom testimony. Come in. It's freezing out there. The house smelled of roasted chicken and betrayal. Though, to be fair, betrayal doesn't really have a scent. It just feels like it should, doesn't it? Something acrid and slightly off, like milk that's turned but hasn't quite admitted it yet. Sophie bounded in wearing paint-stained overalls, the only genuine person in this theatrical production masquerading as a family dinner. Grandpa. At least someone was pleased to see me. Granted, she was 4 and hadn't yet learned that Grandpa was apparently losing his corporate marbles, but still. I'll take authentic affection wherever I can find it these days. I drew you a picture, Sophie announced, thrusting a crayon masterpiece at me. Stick figures in what resembled Hanson Tech's corporate colors. That's you at your big desk, and that's me in the spinning chair. Innocent, trusting, everything her mother wasn't, apparently. Dinner proceeded with the sort of artificial normalcy that makes root canals seem appealingly straightforward. Sophie chattered about preschool. Trevor discussed his latest architectural project with the enthusiasm of someone desperately trying to fill conversational gaps. And Ida? Ida moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 6 months planning corporate warfare, disguised as family concern. Dad, you look tired, she said, wooden spoon halfway to her mouth. Maybe you should rest more. The loaded question, the opening gambit. Because nothing says, I'm concerned about your health, quite like filing legal papers questioning your mental competence. Work keeps me sharp, I replied, meeting her eyes. How are things in the finance department, by the way? She paused, just for a moment, but long enough for me to catch the flicker of calculation across her features. Let's not talk about work at dinner. Family time is sacred. Sacred, like loyalty used to be, like trust, like the assumption that your own daughter wouldn't try to destroy everything you built while serving you perfectly roasted chicken. Since when? I kept my tone light, conversational. You usually love discussing quarterly projections. Not tonight. She turned back to the stove with the sort of dismissal that suggested the topic was closed. Family time is sacred. Sacred enough to preserve over dinner, apparently, but not sacred enough to prevent corporate assassination attempts. How wonderfully selective her reverence had become. The evening crawled forward with the relentless pace of Chinese water torture. Sophie showing me drawings. Trevor discussing building codes. Normal family rituals masking extraordinary betrayal. It was rather like watching a nature documentary about predators. Everything looked perfectly normal until you realized someone was being stalked. At 8:15, I stood to leave. Thank you for dinner. As always, it was perfect. Ida walked me to the door. Dad, are you sure you're okay? You seem different tonight. Different? Yes. Well, discovering your daughter's plotting your professional downfall does tend to affect one's dinner conversation. Funny how that works. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just reflecting on how much Hanson Tech means to me, to our family. Something shifted in her expression. The mask slipping, just for an instant. Guard going up, shields raised, defenses activated. Drive safely, she said. The roads are slick tonight. The door closed behind me with the sort of soft click that sounds rather final. Through the window, I could see her clearing dishes with mechanical efficiency, the perfect hostess tidying up after serving her father his last supper. I sat in my car overlooking Lake Union. City lights reflecting off Blackwater like scattered diamonds on velvet. Rather poetic for the scene of a corporate assassination, really. My hands shook. Not from age, mind you, but from the sheer bloody absurdity of it all. As I dialed Michael again. How did dinner go? He asked. Like a performance. She knows how to act concerned while stabbing me in the back. Because that's what modern family dynamics have become, haven't they? Theater, performance art. Everyone playing their assigned roles whilst plotting each other's destruction with the dedication of Shakespearean villains. The next morning brought Michael's encrypted email containing Ida's formal complaint. 47 pages of surgical character assassination disguised as concerned medical intervention. I read it with my morning coffee, which seemed appropriate somehow. Nothing says good morning. Quite like discovering your daughter's literary talents extend to writing fiction about your alleged mental decline. Subject displays increasing emotional volatility and attachment to outdated business practices. The document declared with the authoritative tone of someone who'd clearly spent considerable time crafting this particular work of creative writing. Emotional volatility. That's what they were calling passion these days. Attachment to outdated business practices. Meaning my stubborn insistence on treating employees like human beings rather than spreadsheet entries. How terribly old-fashioned to me. His refusal to embrace modern corporate strategies suggests diminished cognitive flexibility, consistent with early-stage dementia or depression following spousal loss. Depression following spousal loss. They were weaponizing my grief, turning Elena's death into ammunition for their corporate coup. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. Like watching someone use a funeral eulogy as target practice. The brilliance was undeniable and painful. Every business decision reframed as emotional weakness. Every innovative risk repositioned as declining judgment. Every passionate defense of company values transformed into evidence of instability. She'd learned well. My daughter, too bloody well. Steve Wilson's office felt like a war room by the time we'd spread out our defensive materials. 60 years of friendship crystallized into this moment of corporate chess, with my daughter playing grandmaster and me trying not to be checkmated by my own progeny. She's been methodical, Steve said, reviewing the shareholder analysis we'd compiled. Green for loyal, red for convinced by Ida, yellow for undecided. Rather too much red for comfort. Each shareholder approached with tailored promises. I noted, studying the intelligence we gathered. Corbin gets profit projections, Wheeler receives efficiency studies, others hear modernization speeches. It was textbook corporate seduction, really. Find what each person wants to hear, then promise them exactly that. Never mind that the mathematics were impossible, the projections unrealistic, the promises built on assumptions that would make a fortune teller blush. She's selling them a fantasy, I said. A profitable fantasy. Steve replied with a sort of grim realism that comes from watching corporate dreams collide with mathematical reality. The revenue forecasts she'd been sharing were aggressive to the point of delusion, based on firing half our senior staff and automating customer service. Because nothing says customer satisfaction quite like replacing human beings with chatbots and hoping nobody notices a difference. This is an innovation, I said, spreading our actual financial reports across Steve's conference table. It's corporate vandalism. 30 years of steady 12% growth, 94% employee retention, industry-leading customer satisfaction scores. All apparently meaningless when measured against the intoxicating promise of 25% growth through strategic restructuring. Strategic restructuring. Corporate speak for destroying lives with a smile. The courthouse steps were appropriately dramatic for what was essentially a family therapy session with legal consequences. Rain slicked the stone because, of course, it was raining. Seattle wouldn't dare stage a corporate coup without proper atmospheric conditions. Laura Blake stood at the center of Ida's legal team like a spider in an expensive suit, sharp and predatory, and thoroughly prepared to turn family dysfunction into billable hours. 38 wins in 42 competency hearings, Michael had told me. She specialized in making loving fathers look like declining patriarchs. Ida wore navy blue, conservative, competent, the dutiful daughter protecting family assets from a deteriorating patriarch. She didn't meet my eyes, which was probably wise. Eye contact might have reminded her that the deteriorating patriarch had once taught her to ride a bicycle and read bedtime stories and build sandcastles that would make architects weep. But apparently, bicycle lessons don't count for much when you're staging a corporate revolution. Blake's opening statement was a masterpiece of character assassination disguised as concerned intervention. Your Honor, this case concerns an aging executive whose judgment has become compromised by grief and stubbornness. Grief and stubbornness. As if missing your dead wife and insisting on treating employees decently were character flaws rather than human responses to loss and responsibility. Mr. Hansen has lost the ability to make rational decisions. His emotional attachment to outdated business practices threatens shareholder value and employee security. Emotional attachment to outdated business practices, meaning my stubborn insistence that companies should exist for more than just generating dividends. How terribly irrational of me. When Ida took the witness stand, I watched my brilliant daughter transform into someone I barely recognized. Cool professional, utterly convincing as she systematically dismantled 30 years of my decision-making with precision of a surgeon removing diseased tissue. My father is guided by emotions, not business logic, she testified, voice steady as a metronome. He makes decisions based on personal feelings rather than financial data. Personal feelings, like believing employees deserve job security, like thinking customer satisfaction mattered more than quarterly profits, like assuming companies should contribute to their communities rather than simply extracting value from them. How terribly emotional of me. The charity partnership with my mother's foundation costs us £200,000 annually with no measurable return, she continued. Elena's memory reduced to a line item. Her life's work dismissed as financial waste. The foundation that had provided scholarships to disadvantaged students, funded community technology centers, and kept her spirit alive in the world. All worthless because it didn't generate measurable returns. I suppose love doesn't show up on balance sheets, does it? When I suggested redirecting those funds, Ida continued, he became agitated. Agitated. That's what they call defending your dead wife's legacy these days. How wonderfully clinical. Michael's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. Ms. Hansen Miller, what was Hansen Tech's profit margin last quarter? 12%. And the quarter before? 11.7%. So, under your father's supposedly incompetent leadership, profits are increasing? A hesitation. Short-term fluctuations don't indicate long-term viability. What about employee retention? 94% annually. Industry average? Another hesitation. 67%. So your father maintains higher employee satisfaction than industry standard whilst increasing profits? Retention can indicate resistance to necessary change. Necessary change. Corporate speak for firing people and hoping efficiency software could replace human judgment, because nothing says progress quite like turning your workforce into unemployment statistics. The morning brought Sarah's knock and a folder marked Employee Communications. Confidential. Her expression suggested the contents would be about as pleasant as discovering your daughter's been plotting corporate patricide, which, to be fair, we'd already established. Ida's been holding private meetings, Sarah said, promising salary increases that would bankrupt us. Inside the folder, 6 weeks of secret promises to key employees. 20% salary increases across engineering. 30% for department heads. Stock options that didn't exist based on automation savings that defied mathematics. She's promising employees 20% salary increases based on what? I asked, though I suspected the answer would involve magical thinking and creative accounting. Automation will cut costs so dramatically that massive raises are inevitable, Sarah replied with the tone of someone reading particularly poor science fiction. The mathematics were impossible. Even full automation wouldn't generate enough savings for her promised increases. She was essentially promising everyone a pony funded by unicorn tears and wishful thinking. Steve arrived as I was calculating exactly how spectacularly wrong Ida's projections were. His briefcase contained printed emails showing her approaching new shareholders with promises of explosive growth under her leadership. Magic, I said when Steve asked what her promises were based on. She's telling pension funds and investment groups that I'm an obstacle to explosive growth, because apparently 30 years of steady expansion was less appealing than promises of revolutionary change backed by nothing more substantial than PowerPoint presentations and entrepreneurial delusion. Then Michael called with the sort of news that makes corporate warfare feel almost sporting by comparison. Laura Blake violated ethical standards, he announced with barely contained glee. What sort of violations? She coached Ida's testimony, told her exactly what to say, how to phrase accusations. That's witness tampering. Witness tampering. Because apparently, staging a corporate coup was enough. They decided to add legal fraud to the menu, rather like ordering a complete set of criminal charges a la carte. Furthermore, Michael continued, clearly warming to his theme, I found financial irregularities in Ida's account management. Financial irregularities. In my experience, that phrase usually translates to someone's been nicking money and hoping nobody would notice. Ida transferred funds between accounts without your consent. 3 separate occasions. Total amount, £847,000. £847,000. For legal fees, consultant payments, and campaign expenses for her corporate coup. Because nothing says fiscal responsibility, quite like embezzling nearly £1 million to fund your own revolution. The irony was so thick you could serve it at dinner parties. My daughter, who'd spent months arguing that I was incompetent to manage finances, had been systematically stealing money to pay for her argument. It was rather like hiring assassins to prove you're peaceful. The courthouse felt different for the second hearing. Less like a family therapy session, more like a criminal proceeding, which, given the embezzlement charges, was rather appropriate. Michael rose with the deliberate precision of someone who'd been saving his best ammunition for exactly this moment. Your Honor, the plaintiff conducted unauthorized financial operations. Blake shot to her feet like a striking cobra. Objection. This is beyond the scope. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Reed. Michael approached the evidence table like a surgeon selecting instruments. During discovery, we found 3 unauthorized transfers from corporate accounts. Total amount, £847,000. The number echoed through the courtroom with the weight of mathematical certainty. Ida's face went through several interesting color variations, settling somewhere between pale and greenish. These funds were used to finance Ms. Hanson Miller's legal campaign against her father, without board approval, without documentation, without authorization. Bank statements projected onto the courtroom screen. Dates, amounts, recipient accounts, all the tedious mathematics of embezzlement laid out with accounting precision. This constitutes embezzlement of corporate funds. Blake was scrambling now, her predatory composure cracking like cheap veneer. Your Honor, these accusations are desperate attempts. Desperate? Michael smiled with a sort of cold satisfaction that makes accountants genuinely frightening. These are bank records. Mathematics doesn't lie. When my turn came to testify, I felt oddly calm, rather like standing in the eye of a hurricane, whilst everyone else ran about in circles. 30 years of board meetings had prepared me for exactly this sort of corporate theater. How long have you managed Hanson Tech? Michael asked with formal precision. 30 years. I founded the company in 1995 with £50,000 borrowed against my house. Current annual revenue, £247 million. Net profit, £29.6 million. Numbers don't lie, do they? They're wonderfully honest that way. Unlike daughters who stage corporate coups while serving roast chicken. Have you been declared incompetent by any medical professional? No. I underwent comprehensive evaluation last month. Cognitive function tests, psychological assessment, physical examination. All results were normal for my age. Normal for my age, which is to say, sharper than most people half my age, but apparently not sharp enough to spot my own daughter plotting my professional assassination over family dinners. In your professional opinion, why is your daughter pursuing this legal action? I looked at Ida. She was studying her hands with the intensity of someone trying to divine the future from palm lines. She believes I prioritize company culture over maximum profits. She wants to implement automation and cost-cutting measures that would eliminate jobs and reduce employee benefits. Is profit maximization always the correct business strategy? No. Sustainable growth requires balancing profitability with employee satisfaction, customer loyalty, and community responsibility. Old-fashioned concepts, apparently. These days, companies exist solely to generate shareholder value, preferably by eliminating as many human beings as possible from the process. How wonderfully efficient. Blake's cross-examination was desperate in the way that sinking ships are desperate. Lots of frantic activity that accomplishes nothing useful. Mr. Hansen, isn't it true that you've resisted modernization? I've resisted reckless change. Technology serves business goals, not the reverse. Your daughter claims you're emotionally unstable. My daughter is young and impatient. She confuses passion with instability, conviction with stubbornness. Young and impatient, and apparently willing to commit embezzlement to prove her point about fiscal responsibility. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. When Judge Harrison delivered his verdict, I felt something between relief and hollowness. Victory, yes, but the sort of victory that tastes like ashes and leaves you wondering what you've actually won. The court finds no grounds for declaring Mr. Hansen incompetent to manage his business affairs. Case dismissed. Company saved. Reputation intact. Everything I'd fought for preserved except the one thing that actually mattered, my relationship with my daughter. Ida sat motionless, staring at her hands. The fight had gone out of her completely, leaving behind someone who looked rather smaller than the corporate revolutionary who'd started this war. Victory should feel better than this, shouldn't it? But watching your daughter's dreams collapse, even when those dreams involve your own destruction, is exactly cause for celebration. 10 days later, I found myself on a bench overlooking Lake Union, waiting for a conversation that would determine whether we had a future or just a legal past. The water sparkled in late afternoon sun, Seattle's skyline rising like promises behind the trees. Ida appeared at 3:15, walking slowly across the grass. Jeans and a simple jumper, no business armor, no defensive walls. Just my daughter, looking rather more fragile than the corporate warrior who tried to destroy me. Dad. She sat beside me, maintaining careful distance. Thank you for coming. I've been thinking about what you said at the courthouse, she continued, voice barely above a whisper, about this not being the end of our story. The lake lapped against the shore with the sort of gentle persistence that suggests time heals all wounds. Though in my experience, time mostly just teaches you to live with the scars. I never felt like you were proud of me, she said, the words hitting like physical blows. Every achievement felt invisible. Every success seemed less important than the next board meeting. Pride, such a simple word for such a complicated emotion. I've been proud of her every bloody day, but apparently I've forgotten to mention it, rather like assuming someone knows you love them without actually saying the words. I was always proud of you, I said. I just didn't know how to show it. Mom tried to tell you. Her voice cracked slightly. She said I needed words, not just opportunities. Elena's voice echoed across 5 years of regret. She needs your attention more than the company does. Wisdom I dismissed as female sentimentality, whilst missing the point entirely. Your mother was wiser than I gave her credit for. I admitted. I wanted to prove I was worthy of your love. My love doesn't need proof. It's unconditional. She laughed, but it was bitter as black coffee. Then why did it feel so conditional? Why did every conversation become about work? Why was the company always more important? How do you explain 30 years of misguided priorities? How do you admit that you confuse providing with parenting, success with affection, building an empire with building a relationship? I built Hansen for you, I said, the words sounding hollow even to me. For our family's future. Every late night, every missed dinner, every sacrifice, I thought I was providing security. But you were also providing distance. Distance. Yes, the sort of distance that builds empires but destroys families. The sort of distance that creates successful companies and failed relationships. When I filed that lawsuit, Ida said quietly, I wasn't just fighting for the company. I was fighting for recognition. For validation mattered to me. Christ, she'd always mattered. She'd always been the entire point of everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd worked for. But apparently, I'd been about as effective at communicating that as a mime in a phone booth. You've always mattered, I said. I just showed it poorly. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable now, just honest. The sort of honesty that comes after you try to destroy each other and discover that love survives even corporate warfare. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends. Do you still want to modernize the company?" She stared at me like I just offered her a unicorn. "You'd trust me with that? After everything? What do you say about shared leadership?" Her breath caught. "Kosa, your innovation, my experience. Partnership instead of war. Because that's what families do, isn't it? They find ways to combine their strengths instead of using them as weapons against each other. Revolutionary concept, really? You do that? After everything? Because of everything. You were right about modernization. I was right about culture. Together, we could build something Elena would be proud of." She stood, pacing to the water's edge, and I watched her process a proposal, seeing Elena's thoughtfulness in her movements, Elena's wisdom in her hesitation. "Full partnership?" she asked when she returned. "Equal authority? Shared responsibility. Father-daughter leadership team. I have conditions. Name them. Full transparency. No decisions without consultation. Modern technology implementation. Employee profit-sharing program." Agreed. My conditions. Maintaining company culture. Gradual changes, not revolutionary ones. Family time protected. Elena's foundation continues. She smiled for the first time in months. "Deal." I extended my hand. "Partners?" She shook it firmly, then surprised me by leaning forward and hugging me tightly. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart. I always have." 3 months later, the kitchen smelled like Elena's favorite recipe and new beginnings. Ida moved between stove and counter with practice efficiency, but tonight felt different. Celebration was in every gesture, the sort of celebration that comes after surviving corporate warfare and discovering that family bonds are stronger than legal documents. "Same recipe, same love," she said when I complimented the aroma. The table was set formally but warmly. Candles, good china, the sort of attention reserved for special occasions, like successfully not destroying each other in court. Sophie bounded into the room wearing a dress with fresh paint stains. Some traditions never change, thank God. "Grandpa brought you something special," I announced, handing her a wrap package. She tore through paper with 4-year-old enthusiasm, revealing a miniature business suit. "For when you're ready to run Hanson," I explained. "Will I be the boss?" she asked, holding the tiny jacket against herself. "Someday, sweetheart. Someday you might be, though hopefully with fewer corporate coups and embezzlement charges. One can always dream." Dinner conversation flowed naturally for the first time in months. Sophie chattered about preschool. Trevor discussed his latest architectural project. Ida shared preliminary plans for Hanson Tech's technological modernization, gradual implementation. She emphasized respecting existing staff whilst improving efficiency. The best of both worlds, I agreed, thinking how much Elena would have appreciated this moment of actual family unity. After dessert, Ida produced our partnership agreement, elegant in its simplicity, practical in its details. Everything two stubborn business leaders needed to work together without murdering each other. "Are you not sad anymore, Grandpa?" Sophie asked with the sort of direct honesty that makes adults uncomfortable. "No, sweetheart. Grandpa's happy now because Mummy and Grandpa are friends again. Because we're family again," Ida added softly. "Family again. Not the same family we've been before the war. Something better. Something honest. Something that acknowledged our mistakes whilst choosing to move forward anyway." We signed the documents with steady hands, then raised glasses of champagne and apple juice for Sophie, to toast new beginnings and old bonds that had survived corporate warfare. To Hanson Tech's new future, Ida declared. To family partnerships, I added. To not fighting anymore, Sophie contributed with the wisdom of someone who'd watched adults behave badly and hoped they might learn better. Outside, Seattle summer's beginning. Long days, warm nights, new possibilities. Inside, we were beginning too. Not the same family we'd been before, but something better. Something that understood the difference between providing and parenting, between success and love, between building companies and building relationships. As evening deepened, I prepare to leave with arms full of Sophie's artwork and a heart considerably lighter than it had been in months. See you Monday, partner, Edith said. See you Monday, daughter. Because that's what we were now. Partners in business, partners in family, partners in the sort of future Elena had always envisioned for us. The kind of future where love doesn't need to be proved through quarterly profits, where success is measured in more than just dividend payments. The kind of future where daughters don't need to stage corporate coups to get their father's attention. Rather revolutionary concept, that. But then again, the best revolutions are usually about returning to principles you should never have abandoned in the first place. Family, partnership, love that doesn't require legal documents to validate its existence. Who would have thought something so simple could be so bloody complicated to achieve? But then again, that's families for you. Gloriously messy, impossibly complex, and worth fighting for even when they're fighting against you. Especially then,